Welcome to the Washington Museum of Art. Welcome to the National Air and Space Museum. Press the button by an exhibit if you wish to hear an audio tour. A young man when he died in 1881, Billy the Kid is one of the most famous outlaws from the American Old West, despite not being very well known in his own lifetime. He started his outlaw career as a gunman in the Lincoln County Cattle War in New Mexico. In the years since his death, he became known as a Western folk hero, his character inspiring books, movies, and music. Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, is perhaps the most famous pirate of all. He reportedly lit hemp matches and stuck them in his beard to appear more terrifying. Blackbeard preyed on ships in the Caribbean and Western Atlantic during the early 1700s, and even blockaded the city of Charleston, before finally being brought to bay and defeated by a British captain in 1718. Samuel Morse was an early American painter who also invented the single-wire telegraph system, meaning it only required one wire to transmit the signal, and the code of dots and dashes, short sounds and long sounds, that would bear his name. The greatly increased speed of telegraphy revolutionized communications worldwide, and the Morse code swiftly became the international language of the telegraph. Alexander Graham Bell was a prolific inventor and scientist. He invented the telephone while trying to create a hearing device for the deaf. Bell himself refused to have a telephone in his study, despite his invention's immense popularity. When he died, all telephones in the United States were kept silent for a minute in his honor. This fountain and its little angels are a good example of the Baroque style. Baroque was mostly about grandeur and drama, and meant to impress the viewer with the wealth and education of the art owner. Note the way the angels' poses look active and lifelike. The Thinker is a reproduction of the bronze and marble original located in Paris. Sculpted by an artist called Rodin, this work is supposed to represent the depth of thought required in philosophy. Avant-garde art is considered to be out in front of regular artistic works. It is often experimental in nature, and avant-garde artists may try new techniques or styles that are radically different or disturbing to the viewer. Abstract art means art that does not depict objects found in the natural world. It's supposed to affect the viewer in a non-representational way, meaning the shapes and combinations of color may not resemble any particular thing you would recognize in real life. Abstract sculpture often creates interesting and beautiful shapes formed from application of mathematical equations. Other abstract sculptors draw inspiration from shapes found in nature, creating streamlined objects that resemble jellyfish or exotic flowers. Minimalism is a kind of art where everything is stripped down to the most basic forms, often geometric, with equally sized and shaped parts, plenty of repetition, and neutral colors. Abstract painting sharply differs from traditional painting, which tries to portray the world as it really is, almost like a photograph does. Abstract artists use different approaches with colors, shapes, and perspective to create a different feeling in the viewer. Expressionism is an artistic style that makes bold use of color, stretching of shapes, and exaggerations to create strong emotional reactions in the viewer. While not completely abstract, an expressionist approach does not depict the world exactly as it is. Cubism is an avant-garde painting style that takes apart objects and puts them back together in an abstracted form, often at random angles, as if shown from a number of different viewpoints all at once. The end result can appear highly distorted. The German V-2 rocket was the world's first large-scale liquid propellant rocket vehicle, the first long-range ballistic missile, and the ancestor of today's large rockets and launch vehicles. Launched from mobile platforms, the missile had a maximum range of about 200 miles and a 1-ton warhead. The F-1 engine, with 1.5 million pounds of thrust, powered the first stage of the huge Saturn V launch vehicle that took the first astronauts to the moon. The F-1 used a type of kerosene along with liquid oxygen as the propellants. The F-1's 2,500-pound turbopump pumped in the propellants at 42,500 gallons per minute. The Apollo lunar lander was a separate vehicle designed to land on the moon so the whole Apollo craft would not have to. Over time, it became the most reliable component of the Apollo mission inventory, even serving as a lifeboat for the Apollo 13 crew when the planned lunar landing had to be scrubbed after an explosion in the command module. The exploration of the moon, our nearest celestial neighbor, was one of the greatest challenges ever. During the 1960s and 1970s, the United States conducted a program of lunar exploration, starting with robotic scouts and culminating in the Apollo manned landings. The robotic spacecraft transmitted detailed images of the moon and searched for landing sites for human explorers. Beginning in July 1969, 12 astronauts explored portions of the airless, dusty moonscape. The last Apollo manned landing mission ended in December 1972. Your weight is a measure of gravity. If you visited another world, your weight would change, because the mass and size of that world would differ from Earth's. so the force of gravity acting on you would be different. Your mass, however, would not change. On the Moon, your weight would be 1/6 of what it is on Earth, allowing you to move higher and farther on the surface as you walk. This is Abel, a preserved rhesus monkey. She flew into space with Baker, a squirrel monkey, in a 1959 experiment designed to test the biomedical effects of space travel. They reached an altitude of 300 miles and traveled at speeds reaching 10,000 miles per hour before re-entering Earth's atmosphere and being recovered by Navy ships. Both monkeys survived the trip. Spacesuits had to meet all the astronauts' life support needs. Backpacks, left on the Moon, provided oxygen, temperature, and humidity control, suit pressure, and power for their communications and data display systems. This suit, made of 22 layers of different materials, plus a 3-layer undergarment, also protected them against extreme lunar temperatures and micrometeoroids. Project Mercury was America's first human spaceflight program. It had the goal of putting a man into orbit around the Earth. In February of 1962, Mercury astronaut John Glenn became the first American to do so, making 3 orbits around the world before returning to splash down in a tiny capsule protected from the heat of atmospheric re-entry by an ablative shield. From the beginning of the space age, people recognized that Earth-orbiting satellites, able to see and communicate across vast distances, promised unique benefits. Today, hundreds of civilian and military application satellites ring the Earth, often operating side by side in orbit. They provide communications, photography, remote sensing, weather analysis, and navigation. The Lunar roving vehicle was a battery-powered dune buggy taken to the Moon on Apollo missions 15, 16, and 17. The rover was stowed on the descent stage of the lunar module and deployed upon arrival at the lunar surface. It was operated with a spacecraft stick rather than a steering wheel, and could move forwards and backwards. This is the sarcophagus of the pharaoh Khamun-Ra, a 4th dynasty tyrant, chiefly known for his reign of terror across Egypt. A sarcophagus is a funeral receptacle for a dead body, most often carved or cut from stone, and designed to stand above ground. Amelia Earhart was the first female pilot to fly solo across the Atlantic. She set many other records before her disappearance in 1937 over the Pacific in an attempt to fly around the world, a journey that would have covered over 22,800 miles. George Armstrong Custer was a U.S. Army officer in the American Civil War and the Indian Wars. He commanded the 7th Cavalry when it was defeated by the Sioux at the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, better known as Custer's Last Stand. Al Capone was a notorious Chicago mobster who made his fortune on bootlegging and various other organized criminal activities in the 1920s. He eventually went to prison for not paying his taxes. Ivan the Terrible ruled as Tsar of Russia for almost 40 years before his death in 1584. He expanded trade, created a secret police, built the famous St. Basil's Cathedral, and took away the rights of Russian peasants. Napoleon Bonaparte rose from the rank of general to Emperor of France. Finally defeated in 1815 at the Battle of Waterloo, he is considered one of the finest military commanders in history, and has been credited with the invention of modern infantry warfare. This Pitcairn Autogyro uses a rotor for lift like a helicopter, but its rotor turns from aerodynamic force instead of an engine. A propeller on the nose means the Autogyro needs a short distance for takeoff. In 1931, Amelia Earhart set a world altitude record for autogyros at over 18,000 feet. Allosaurus Fragilis lived around 150 million years ago in what is now western North America. It preyed upon large herbivorous dinosaurs that roamed around rivers and floodplains rich in vegetation. Its skull was massive, with dozens of large, sharp teeth. Allosaurus reached lengths of almost 40 feet. A giant deep blue diamond of magnificent hue, the Hope has a rich history that includes a curse and a mysterious past. Geoforensic tests done in 2005 revealed it to be part of a larger diamond stolen from the French crown jewels in 1792. Diamond, or crystallized carbon, is the hardest of all substances and remains one of the world's most prized gemstones. The polar bear is the world's largest land predator, averaging twice as large as a lion or tiger. Its diet consists mostly of seals, which can only be hunted from sea ice. As the Arctic sea ice melts, more polar bears are struggling to survive. Polar bears are well insulated by their fur and blubber, so much so that they appear almost invisible to infrared cameras. The saber-toothed tiger became extinct perhaps 10,000 years ago. It probably hunted large, slow prey, which its huge canines would have helped bring down in a sudden ambush. They fall into 2 general classifications: dirk-toothed cats with longer, narrower upper canines, and scimitar-toothed cats, whose canines were shorter and broader. Leonardo da Vinci was born near the city of Florence in mid-15th century Italy. A classic example of Renaissance man, talented in many different areas, Da Vinci was a brilliant painter, scientist, inventor, engineer, sculptor, botanist, mathematician, musician, and writer. He is best known for his painting of the Mona Lisa and his anatomical drawings. Far ahead of his time, Da Vinci drew up plans for a tank, concentrated solar power, a hang glider, and even a helicopter, with massive 9-inch teeth serrated like curved thick daggers that could also crush bone. Tyrannosaurus was possibly the largest flesh-eating land animal of all time. One of the last surviving dinosaurs before their mass extinction 65 million years ago, Tyrannosaurus trailed herds of plant-eating dinosaurs, picking off the weak, young, and sick. This head represents a moai, one of the large stone statues found on Easter Island in the Pacific Ocean. Almost all moai are carved from volcanic stone quarried from an extinct volcano on the island. Each moai is supposed to represent a dead chieftain or important person. Unlike the massive sandstone tombs raised by the Egyptians, Central American pyramids, like this Aztec example, used a stepped construction with a temple or altar located on top. The Aztec people dominated central Mexico in the 14th through 16th centuries, before being defeated by Spanish invaders. The term jungle typically refers to a tropical rainforest. Tropical rainforests are home to more species than anywhere else on Earth, as many as 2/3 of the living plant and animal species on the planet, with thousands of species not yet identified or categorized. The nautilus is a cephalopod, which translates to head-foot. It is in the same class of species as the octopus or the squid. However, the nautilus is the only cephalopod with a shell. Nautiluses feed mostly on shrimp, crustaceans, and small fish, which they capture with their tentacles. The age of the oldest trees is determined by counting their growth rings, typically 1 ring per season of growth. Trees that grow in tropical climates grow continuously and do not have growth rings. The greatest verified age of a tree is 9,550 years for a specimen of Norway spruce. A canyon is a deep gorge carved between cliffs, most often by the action of a river over hundreds of years. But canyons may also be formed by other processes, such as geologic uplift of the surrounding land. Anubis is the jackal-headed god of Egyptian mythology, associated with death, mummification, and the afterlife. He is particularly important as a guardian of the dead and their tombs.
Welcome to the Smithsonian Castle. Press the button by an exhibit if you wish to hear an audio tour. Welcome to the National Museum of Natural History.